The Ontological Argument by St Anselm and Descartes. It was started off as a thought experiment. The argument is a priori argument and a deductive argument. The main point of the ontological argument is to say that if you deny God, then you are self-contradicting yourself. So how does this argument go? Well, St. Anselm starts by defining God. He says God is the entity that nothing greater can be conceived, i.e. thought of. And if he only exists in the mind, not in reality, then we can imagine something greater in reality. That would be absurd because God is the greatest entity that can be conceived of. Therefore, God exists in reality too. Guanilo, a monk, he picked up on this point and he said, no, this is wrong. He said, if I think of a perfect island, that does not mean that suddenly it comes into reality because it is the perfectest island. You can't do that. But Guanilo didn't see that something like a perfect island has no intrinsic maximum. It can keep on being improved until it reaches its greatest level, and it will still not be perfect. You'll have to keep on improving it. Whereas God, you don't improve him. He is the greatest possible entity that can be conceived. Also, he didn't realize that he was comparing a contingent object to a necessary object, and because he was comparing two different sorts of objects, St. Anselm picked up on this point and he added something to the argument. He said, if God was contingent, then you can have a greater being, because contingent objects, they rely on other objects. If God is necessary, he doesn't rely on any other object. And we know this because we have defined him as the greatest entity that can be conceived. And so then Descartes came and he revised the argument in essence. He said the sentence God exists, right, is analytical. He said you don't need to verify this statement. He said if you open at the statement, existence is part of God. God exists as an analytical statement. Then he said God has all the perfections. Therefore, existence to God is no more foreign than 180 degrees to a triangle. It is like the nature of God. God has to exist, he said. Existence is a predicate. That's what he said. And both arguments of St. Anselm and Descartes, they're trying to say if you deny God, it's you're being self-contradictory. Because if you say God doesn't exist, but then agree that nothing greater can be conceived of, you are kind of contradicting yourself, because to actually be that greatest possible being that is conceived of, he has to exist. St. Anselm already proved that in the first argument. Now this got 5 main criticisms. One we had already looked at was Guanilo, and the next one was by Immanuel Kant. He said existence is not a predicate. He said that existence cannot be a predicate because a predicate must give information about the object. By saying I have an orange highlighter and saying, oh, it is cuboid, we are understanding that it's a cuboid. Therefore, cuboidness, the shape, is a predicate. If we say the highlighter exists, we are learning no more about it. Therefore, existence cannot be a predicate. And he says, Descartes, you are wrong. And he said that, okay, you can't reject 180 degrees to a triangle. But what if you reject the whole triangle altogether? That's fairly, you can understand that. Same way, you're not rejecting God's existence, you're rejecting God altogether. That makes logical sense. The argument isn't saying that doesn't make logical sense. Then St. Thomas Aquinas, he believed in God, but he had a problem with this argument. He said a priori arguments do not work. He said we can't understand certain concepts in a priori for a priori argument to work. He said, for example, the ontological argument, how can you understand perfection when we haven't experienced it yet? How are we supposed to use that for God when we don't actually understand and experience it? His second problem, which was the biggest problem, was saying that how on earth can you define God? God is personal to everybody and he transcends our understanding. Once again, we can't understand these things. So this argument doesn't work because if you can't define God, then none of the arguments work. Hume also came into this. Hume said, define something into existence sounds a bit funny to me. Just because I say money is the most powerful object in the world doesn't mean suddenly money is going to come into our world. I'm giving this example. I know money exists, but what I'm trying to say is, for example, like an engineer, if they're designing this amazing carbon efficient car, just because they're saying it and doesn't mean it's suddenly going to come into existence. It doesn't work. But things can be proved into non-existence through this, because by looking at the car, you might say, this doesn't work, therefore this can never exist because we will never have the technology for it. Or something like a hexagonal triangle. That's definitely not existence. They just don't go together. The fifth one was not by a philosopher, but it's the whole of the ontological argument is based on logic. So the fifth thing is to do with logic. Basically, it says that the argument is saying that if you deny God, you're self-contradicting yourself, as we explored before. That is something the argument is mainly trying to get to, is that you have to believe in God, otherwise you will be contradicting yourself. That is what the argument is saying. But it's saying, because logic is a linguistic convention that tells us nothing about reality. What that basically means is that logic is something we use to think through, to speak, to understand. It doesn't tell us anything about reality. Therefore, the whole argument is kind of wishy-washy, airy-fairy, because it's based on logic, and logic tells us actually nothing about reality. So now you decide, where do you stand?